Some of the most intense, most apocalyptic images in all of literature, they come from one ancient book. Today we're going to dive deep into just one of those verses from the book of Revelation. It's a single line that has both fascinated and frankly terrified people for centuries, and it really brings up a huge question. Is this a literal prediction, or is it something else entirely?
It became as the blood of a dead man, and every living soul died in the sea. Wow. I mean, that is just so incredibly visceral, right? It's a global catastrophe packed into one single sentence. So what on earth is it actually describing? Are we talking about a future apocalypse? Is it some kind of symbolic warning? Well, let's dig in and see if we can figure it out. All right, so to really get to the bottom of this, we've got to start with the text itself. And that means we have to go back to the original language it was written in, which was Koine Greek. This is going to give us the most direct, unfiltered, literal meaning of the words right there on the page. Okay, so the Greek gives us this really clear step-by-step sequence of events. You've got an angel who takes that phylline, which is a bowl, and exahan, he pours it out into the thalason, the sea. And the result? It's just total devastation. Every living thing, apatheinen, it died. The language here paints a really stark, unfiltered picture of this catastrophe. But here's where a crucial detail comes in. The Greek phrase haima hos nekro, it doesn't just mean blood. It specifically means blood like that of a corpse. Whoa. So we're not just talking about the water turning red. This is describing something thick, coagulated, totally lifeless. That specific kind of grisly detail really emphasizes the absolute finality of the death happening in that sea. So when you put all these pieces together, the literal reading is just undeniable. It's describing a catastrophic physical judgment that gets poured out onto the world's oceans, wiping out all life. But that's just one layer of meaning. This isn't the whole story, not by a long shot.
Because this kind of powerful imagery, it didn't just appear out of nowhere. The author of Revelation was tapping into a really deep well of stories and symbols that would have been instantly recognizable to the people reading it back then.
And the clearest connection of all has to be this, the very first plague of Egypt from the book of Exodus. You remember, right? The Nile River was turned to blood, all the fish died. The pattern is just unmistakable. It's a divine judgment that turns life-giving water into a symbol of death. And this wasn't just a one-off thing. This theme of water turning to blood as a sign of divine judgment, it pops up multiple times in the Old Testament, from the prophet Ezekiel all the way to the Psalms. So this idea of a literal physical plague, it fits into a really clear historical and literary pattern. But here's where things get really fascinating. What if we've been reading this all wrong? I mean, what if the sea isn't the sea? And what if the death isn't a physical death? Posing that one question just opens up an entirely different way of understanding this verse. And this brings us to a whole second major school of thought. It's one that reads this passage not as a literal apocalypse, but as this profound spiritual metaphor. This way of thinking often comes from theological traditions that focus more on the internal, personal journey of faith, rather than a strict end-times prophecy. So in this symbolic reading, the sea isn't a literal ocean at all. By pointing to other parts of the Bible, this view sees the sea as a pretty consistent metaphor for the great mass of humanity. All the peoples and nations of the world. So the judgment isn't poured on the water, it's poured out on mankind. Okay, so if the sea is humanity, then what does the blood of a dead man symbolize? Well, in this view, it represents the death of our old, sinful self, what some theologians call the Adam nature. It's not a physical death, but a spiritual one. It's the end of an old way of life to make room for something new. Right, so here's the crucial point. When you put those two symbols together, the verse completely transforms. It's not about an ecological disaster anymore. Instead, it becomes a description of a profound spiritual event where the sacrifice of Jesus, his blood, brings about the death of the old, sinful life within all of humanity, clearing the way for a brand new, redeemed life. And this symbolic reading, it's not just some random idea. It's actually supported by a whole network of other big theological concepts that you find all throughout the New Testament. Ideas like being crucified with Christ, or the old self passing away and being made a new creation. So we've now explored two completely different ways to understand the exact same words. On one hand, you've got this vision of a future, literal judgment on the planet. And on the other, a symbolic picture of the transformation of the human soul.
Let's just break it down one last time side by side. You have the literal apocalyptic view, the sea is water, the event is a future apocalypse, and death is physical. Then you have the symbolic theological view. The sea represents humanity, the event is a spiritual transformation, and death is the end of our old self. Two just vastly different readings from the very same text.
And that's really the core takeaway here, isn't it? It's a powerful reminder that these ancient texts are often incredibly layered and complex. The meaning we end up finding can depend entirely on the interpretive lens we bring to it, whether we're focused on history and language or on theology and metaphor. Which really just leaves us with a final question for you to think about. When we come across any ancient text, how does knowing that these different layers of meaning exist, how does that change the way we read it? Does it make it more complicated, or does it actually make it so much richer?